I never believed in the supernatural until my son made me reconsider things. We moved into a nice big old house a few years after he was born, so we could have enough space to raise him and the other children my husband and I planned on having in the future. However, only a few weeks after settling in, when he was just 4 years old, he started having terrible nightmares. He would come into our room in the middle of the night, screaming and crying, saying there was a skeleton woman in his closet. We always checked to make him feel safe, but of course, we never found anyone. My husband and I tried everything to get it to stop, but none of it had any effect. At one point, we decided to keep the closet locked up. Most of the time we went back to check on it, we found the doors open, so we thought if we zip-tied the handles together, the doors would stay shut, and whatever our son was worried about being in there wouldn't be able to come out. However, this didn't work either. Our son still came barging into our room that night, and when we went to check his room, we found that the zip tie had been cut off. This was when my husband and I took a much more serious approach to this issue. We asked our son if he had taken the scissors from the kitchen to open the closet, but he said no. This left us in a conundrum. Our son hadn't slept properly in almost a month. We asked him a bunch of questions about the skeleton woman he said he kept seeing, but he seemed very afraid to talk about it. All he said was that she kept asking him to go into the closet with her. Eventually, we asked him to draw the skeleton woman. It was a simple drawing, just a stick figure of a woman dressed in a long plain dress, peeking out of the closet. But there were 3 distinct features that made a chill run down my spine. The first thing was the indication of blood running down from her neck, but that alone wasn't the worst of it. The second thing was the noose in her hand. When I asked my son what she was holding, he said he didn't know except that it was a piece of rope she always had. He was only 4 years old, and we monitored everything he watched, so there was basically no way he could have even been exposed to what a noose was or what it was used for. Yet still, it showed up in his drawing. The final thing was the words written above her head. Just 2 words. Join us. I had been teaching my son how to read and write for several months at that point to prepare him for school, but he had never exhibited the motivation to write much more than a few letters of the alphabet at a time. Now suddenly, he had perfectly spelled 2 entire words, which showed me just how scared of the skeleton woman he was. Unfortunately, this didn't give us any clue as to what to do. We told him to tell that scary woman to go away, hoping he could conjure up some courage and learn something from the experience the next time he saw her. That next time turned out to be the very same night. I woke up around 11 p.m., but not to the sound of my son screaming and crying. I heard a weird thumping in the walls. Then I realized that was coming from my son's bedroom, so I got up and walked over to his room. When I opened the door, I saw that he wasn't in bed, and once again, the closet door was open, but the light was off. I crept over to the closet, but right as I got up to it, something happened that I still can't comprehend. 2 bony, bloody hands jumped out from the doors and yanked them closed. I immediately ran over to them and tried to get the closet open, but no matter how hard I pulled, they wouldn't budge. I screamed for my husband to help me, and a few seconds later, he came running in. I told him to break down the doors, and without any second thoughts, he stepped back to the foot of our son's bed, then charged straight at the closet, smashing through the doors. He fell to the ground on top of them, and I raced in to find my son hanging by the neck from the rack. His face was swollen and purple, and he was still fighting against the rope, kicking the wall and trying to pull himself up. I grabbed him and lifted him a few inches to get the pressure off his neck so he could breathe. My husband stood up a few moments later and was absolutely shocked. Then, he went to the kitchen and came back with a knife to cut the rope. Our son was barely conscious and had horrible burns around his neck, but we had come just in time to save him from any serious harm. However, we still took him to the hospital to make sure he was okay. In doing so, we inadvertently forced the doctors to call the police to do an investigation, as if we had abused our son. We were questioned by the sheriff himself. Among the many questions he asked, one of them was if we knew anything about the history of the house we were living in, which we did not. He went on to explain that 30 years ago, when he was in his 2nd year as a deputy, he was called to that house for a wellness check. A family had been living there, but the mother had been so horrifically abused and starved by her husband that she had a severe psychotic breakdown. She severed his genitals in his sleep, then suffocated and hanged all 3 of their children in the exact closet of my son's bedroom before slitting her own throat. It was only the sheriff's knowledge of that case that kept us from being charged with child abuse. And he strongly urged us to move out of that house as soon as possible, which we absolutely did.